Hi, I'm Brett Ingram, award-winning entrepreneur, and today I want to share with you 12 tactics to negotiate and make deals like a master. How does the word negotiate make you feel? I know for some people the reaction can be pretty extreme. I know people that have thought of the idea of buying a new car, and just the very idea of going into a car dealership and needing to sit down with the salesperson and negotiate the price, negotiate the terms, then listen to the made up, pre-made excuse that they need to go into the back room to talk to their boss to get approval on it, when in reality everybody knows that those sorts of setups are already done and designed so the car dealer can get the maximum amount of money out of every person that goes into the showroom. They don't need approval. They know what the prices are going to be, and they know whether or not they're able to make the deals based on what you tell them. But it gives them an opportunity to go back, assess the situation with their boss, and then come back and offer you something to try to get a little bit more. So people in general for a long, long time have really hated buying cars because it's a big ticket item that costs a lot of money. It's a big investment, and it's always been a sort of painful process. That's why you see things like Carvana and some of these new services. Some car dealerships now have a no hassle, no haggle policy because in general, a lot of people really dislike negotiation. Now, the flip side of that is that you have some people that absolutely love it. They will negotiate anything for the sake of negotiation, even when there's nothing to negotiate. I worked with a lady who her whole identity was tied to the idea that she could negotiate and get something more out of everybody. And she got a charge and a thrill out of the idea of trying to make these situations where it wasn't, she didn't care about win-win. She just wanted to win and didn't care if it was a loss on the other side. So I'm sure in her life, in the grand scheme of all the negotiations she's ever done, she's probably made out better than most of the people she's negotiated against. However, she turns a lot of people off. I know the people in the office didn't really like her. She wasn't very popular, and nobody really wanted to deal with her because of the fact that that was her sort of her whole modus operandi in terms of the way that she reacted. In fact, she cost me a deal because she was insisting that I was being taken advantage of by a potential client, stepped in to try to negotiate it on my behalf, and blew up the entire deal because what I was telling her was actually the fact. And she worked ourselves right out of that deal and lost all the money. So, that was a really tough situation, but some people absolutely love it. So the challenge is, if we are business owners, if we're entrepreneurs, we're going to deal with all kinds of people. And some of those people don't want to negotiate, so those might actually work out okay if we don't want to negotiate either. But if we run into somebody like her, unfortunately, if we aren't prepared, we run the risk of being taken advantage of. We run the risk of setting ourselves up for a lose-win situation where we lose out at the benefit of the other party just because they like it, we don't. We just want to get it over with, and they want to sort of turn the screw and get the most out of us that they possibly can. So it's important to understand the tactics of negotiation, and even if we don't want to become an expert at it, it's important to understand some things that we can do that will at least help us put ourselves in better position to come out of it successful and getting exactly what we want. So it's an important skill for everybody. We all deal with it in our daily lives, but especially entrepreneurs and small business owners. Specifically, it will affect our growth, our ability to grow our business. It'll affect our revenue, our ability to generate money or how much we generate. It'll affect our expenses directly if we're negotiating for something we have to pay for. And therefore, it will also affect our profits. And all of those things are essentially the scorecard by which we measure success as business owners. So it's super important that we at least understand this, even if it's not a topic that we're in love with. Now, negotiation will come up at some point or another if we own a business. It's just inevitable. So it might come up with suppliers. If we have to buy things from suppliers, we might need to negotiate terms or price. It might come up with customers. especially if we have like an unhappy customer, we're trying to satisfy them. We're going to need to be able to negotiate to figure out how to make them happy without giving away so much that it's terrible for us. Even if we're dealing in a business where we negotiate with our customers in general, if it's a higher ticket thing, we might need to be able to negotiate. Team members, we might need to be able to negotiate work schedules or terms or hiring or salaries or any of these other things. So we ultimately need to be able to negotiate deals. We need to be able to negotiate contracts, partnerships, and prices. So let's talk about 12 negotiation tactics and tips and how to use them. The first one is preparation and research, right? The best defense with anything is to understand what we're getting into before we even get started. If we enter a negotiation blind, even if we're confident in our own negotiation skills, the odds we're going to win or get what we want in a win-win situation are very, very low. We want to be thoroughly prepared by understanding what the other party is going to want, right? So we're gonna obviously evaluate what we need. We go into any negotiation and we're gonna think through what we want to get out of it, what's super important, all these other things. But if we look at it from the other party's perspective and we figure out what they want and we understand what their needs are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, we know where their vulnerabilities are, and we also know our own goals and limits. Now we have sort of a clear universe that we can look at through that lens and understand where sort of the barriers and boundaries are going to be on this particular negotiation, right? It's going to give us confidence and it's going to give us flexibility during the negotiation. The second thing that we want to do is build rapport. Building rapport is super important. If you've ever had a salesperson knock on your door and you open the door and they want to sell you a vacuum cleaner or encyclopedias or whatever it is, your first instinct is to shut the door. You don't know them, they're a stranger, you know they want to sell you something. But if you've ever been approached by any of these magazine kids or some of the newer products that they're selling, I know they did home security systems and things like that. Some of these sales programs have gotten very good and very sophisticated. They knock on the door and they start you off with a couple of jokes or some disarmingly simple things that get you to smile, that get you to nod your head, that get you to say yes. They don't ask you for anything and they don't try to sell you or push you on anything. They start by building rapport, by just establishing rapport, by making you laugh, by being conversational, by making it comfortable. That's a super valuable, disarmingly effective technique because what it does is it lowers our defenses. It's the same thing, by the way, that stories do. The reason that there are so many stories used in sales processes is because the minute someone says, let me tell you a story, your guard drops, your defenses drop, you're open-minded, you're interested, you want to hear the story. That story might end with a sales pitch. But if they come at you with the perspective of, hey, let me tell you why this is a great product, immediately we back up. Our whole perspective is negative and confrontational and defensive. We don't want to be pitched. But if it's a story, we'll listen. And that's exactly what people do. So in a negotiation, by establishing trust, getting the other person to smile, make some small talk, create a positive atmosphere, that's super important. Talk about common interests and a respectful demeanor. When I used to go on sales calls and staffing, I'd always look around the manager's office and I'd always look for things that I could comment on. Pictures of their kids. They've got a Mets bobblehead. Well, I'm a Red Sox fan, so I needle them about that. We don't always have to agree. We don't need to constantly play to their ego or pretend that we're like them and everything to make them like us. We can also be, playfully sort of confrontational by laughing at them and saying, oh, when's the last World Series they won? Stuff like that. But those kinds of things all lower the guard and make people more comfortable. And when we get into that mind frame, everybody's in a much more positive situation and much more eager to want to make a deal. And so it sets the stage for respect. It sets the stage for cooperation and a more amicable negotiation. The third thing we want to do is listen actively. What happens a lot of times in a negotiation is we know what we want. So the other person starts talking and all we're thinking about is, Shut up, shut up, shut up so I can say what I want. Shut up so I can say, yeah, 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 this is great. We just can't wait for them to stop talking so we can tell them what we want and what our terms are. It's a huge mistake. What we want to do is listen actively. We want to concentrate on exactly what they're being said. Don't worry about evaluating anything. Don't worry about our own points. We've already done our preparation, so we're going to get back to that. Let's understand what they're being said, what's being said, and let's read between the lines of what they're saying. So there are going to be words that are spoken, but there's going to be body language. There's going to be other things that they're going to say. They're going to tip things off that are going to give us little clues. And if we're alert to it, if we're paying attention to it, and we're looking for it, we're going to recognize that. That's going to give us power in the negotiation. It's going to also help reveal the other party's underlying interests and concerns, so when we have our turn, we can address that effectively. The fourth thing we want to do is aim for win-win outcomes. Win-win is always the best, because even if we sort of ram people into a win-lose, like that woman I mentioned used to do, the problem is even if you get the deal signed, there's buyer's remorse. The other side of the agreement doesn't feel good about it. So they might cancel it if they still have a chance to do that. At very least, they're not going to want to deal with you again. And they aren't going to feel good about the way that it worked out. So we might get a temporary win, but we lose in the long term. If we have a win-win where both parties come out ahead, everybody feels good about it, and everybody comes out of it wanting to do business again. So we want to approach the negotiation with a mindset of finding a solution that benefits both parties. And sometimes we need to be creative to do that. But if we focus on our mutual interests rather than our position, we want X, you want Y, and what it is we're both trying to get out of this negotiation, then we can find creative solutions that ultimately will help us both out so we both win. And when we do that, that's very effective. The fifth technique or tactic that we want to use is silence. We can use silence very strategically. Most people get very uncomfortable when conversations become silent. It gets awkward. Somebody wants to talk. They want to break the ice. They don't want that tension to build in the room. But in the right circumstance, if we are silent, there's a very famous scene in the movie Good Will Hunting with Robin Williams and Matt Damon, where Matt Damon is the subject, and Robin Williams is the psychologist that's trying to break him down and understand him and everything else. And they get into one session where literally Matt Damon doesn't say a word. He just essentially stares at the clock for the entire hour session. And Robin Williams doesn't either. And when he's talking to his friend after, he said, "So wait a minute, neither one of you said anything?" He said, "No, actually, he just stared at the clock for the whole hour. It's pretty impressive." And he said, it's a contest. He's testing me. And I can't talk first or I lose. And that's very, very powerful tool. Silence works that way in negotiations because nobody wants silence. So in general, whoever talks first loses. If they're more uncomfortable and they say something first, they're more likely to say something that's conciliatory or making a concession toward what we want. And so basically, if we say nothing and we go quiet, it can encourage the other party to reveal more information or reconsider their position. The assumption if there's silence is that, the other party isn't happy with the deal. Even if you're happy with it. If we stay quiet, it might make them believe we aren't, and they might be willing to give us up another term that we wanted or another thing. So we don't want to try to fill every pause in conversation. We want to pretend we're comfortable, even if our skin is crawling. And this is especially true and especially effective after we make an offer or state our position. So when we get to a point where we're going to state our offer, if we state it and then shut up, that's the most effective thing we can do. If we keep talking, we'll eventually talk ourselves into taking less of a deal than what we wanted. The sixth tactic that we want to use is we want to anchor it. We want to anchor our offer. So we basically want to start off with an initial offer that's in our favor, right? It's better than what we actually expect to get, but it's in our favor. And we do that because that sets the stage. When people consider a negotiation, what they think about is you have a position, I have a position, they don't equal. So we need to meet somewhere in the middle. If I ask for more than what I expect from the beginning, then the negotiation will lead us to where I want to be. If I ask for what I want, the negotiation leads me to below what I want. In negotiation class, when I was getting my MBA, they called this the Louis Rule. And it was based on, I think, one of the characters from the old sitcom Taxi. And basically what he would do is every time he was negotiating, he would ask for double what he wanted. And so ultimately you get in this negotiation and the person's like, there's no way I'm going to give you that. And the other person comes back and offers you half, which is in the middle, which is exactly what you wanted to begin with. So he would double or ask for twice as much as what he really wanted and ultimately get what we want. So we call that the Louis Law, and that's the way we learn to negotiate. So the anchoring effect can really make the subsequent concessions seem like we're giving up more than we really are and lead to a better final outcome for us. The seventh tactic is to know what we call a BATNA. And this is a very common term in negotiation. And it's called the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If we cannot come to an agreement, we need to consider what would happen if we just walk away. If we say, you know what, if we can't make this agreement before we go in the negotiation, what are our best alternatives? Like, is this a red line? Do we have to make this deal no matter what? Or are there 4 other suppliers we could go to? Are there 4 other people we could deal with? Could we just go about this in a different way if this negotiation fails? Because when we know what our BATNA is, and if it's strong and we know we're in a better position, it gives us leverage, it gives us confidence in the negotiation, and it allows us to not try to give up too much in order to make the deal. If our BATNA is strong, we can negotiate from a position of strength. If it's weak, at least if we know that going in, we can still try to negotiate more cautiously, and we can still go for what we want, but we can be willing to step it back a little bit further if we need to, if we absolutely need to make the deal. The 8th step, or the 8th tactic, is to be prepared to walk away, right? Sometimes the best decision is to walk away. Nobody wants to feel like they've sunk time and energy into a deal and then it doesn't work out. Nobody wants to do that. But the other party is equally in the same situation. And if we're in a situation where it's so bad that we need to walk away from the deal if it doesn't meet our minimum requirements. The fact of the matter is it has to be a win-win. We at least have to win and get what we want, otherwise it doesn't make sense. When I was in graduate school and we were doing the negotiation class, there was one guy in there from another culture. And from his culture, negotiation works like hard-nosed negotiation. If you're going to make a penny and I'm going to make $1, we're going to make the deal because that's the way it works. And that's the way he approached it from a total standpoint of logic. But in the United States, we don't really negotiate that way. People want to feel as though they're both coming out of it ahead. Otherwise, somebody will walk away from the deal. And based on the scenario they gave us, he was aware of what our cost was. So he knew, we didn't know he knew, but he knew what our cost was. So he offered us, at the start of the negotiation, he offered our group our cost plus 1 cent. And when we started to come back and give our stand, he stopped us. He put his hand up and he said, wait, this is the offer. It's your cost plus a penny. That's it. Here's the paper, sign the deal. And we looked at him and we said, there's no deal. He's like, what do you mean there's no deal? You're making money, I'm making money. We said, right, but we know that you're making $1 a unit. We're making a penny. He goes, but you're still making profit. And I said, right, but it isn't fair because you're making $1 per unit, we're making a penny. If we do it at 51 cents, 50 cents, that's a deal we could both agree to. We're not going to give you $1 profit. He was absolutely stunned and astounded, but he refused to give. We refused to give. There was no deal. We both walked away. And he said that he learned from the negotiation after that it's not as simple as just dollars and cents. And he's right, it's not. People have to get a feeling that they're going to be okay. And so if we need to, we have to be prepared to literally pull the plug and walk away. Sometimes that will get the other side to come back to us. It can be done as a tactic, but we also have to be willing to do it for a real thing and sometimes walk away and not do it at all and just have that be the final outcome. It does happen. The ninth tactic is a concession strategy. So we want to know in advance what we want. We also want to know what we're willing to give up. And while we may have a list of what we're willing to give up, we start by just giving up one. And it's the thing that is the least important to us, right? We want to only concede one thing and ask for something every time we concede. So that way we're getting something for giving something. If we end up needing to concede all the things that are on our list, so be it, because we predetermined that list and we're already okay and willing to do that. But we want to make sure that we get something in return each time we make a concession. That way, they understand it's a give and take. If they're then going to ask you for something, they're usually going to offer something. If they don't, say, okay, well, we might be willing to give that, but then we want this. And that will preserve the relative value of the deal for both parties. And it'll also make the other party feel like they're getting a fair deal. If we just say yes to every concession they want, they'll just keep asking for more until we're not making anything anymore and it doesn't make sense for us. The 10th tactic that's very, very powerful and sometimes not used enough is to use objective facts and criteria. Base our negotiations on points that are on objective criteria, like market rates, expert opinions, industry standards. These things can help reach a fair agreement. It adds credibility to our argument and our stance, and it also lets the other party know that we are really prepared. You are not going to snow us on this. We know the market, and if they don't, it can even be intimidating to them. So they may be willing to just take the deal because they didn't do their homework. So it can be very persuasive, especially if the other party starts to get unreasonable with what they want. Because once we bring it back to facts, once we bring it back to comparable offers and what else is going on in the industry, it's pretty hard to argue with that. The 11th tactic is flexibility and creativity. Be open and creative to solutions that satisfy both parties' interests that maybe neither one of us thought on the way in. But as we start to think about it, when we're in the room together, we can brainstorm some ideas that work together. Like maybe this particular deal, we can't make it the perfect win-win, but we structure a subsequent deal in advance that we sign for now that's tilted a little bit more in the other person's favor. Or maybe we give a concession or get something that's outside of the actual realm of the initial agreement. Maybe they have another asset or benefit for us that we hadn't thought of, or vice versa. And that can reveal opportunities for agreement that weren't even there initially. And the 12th tactic is effective communication. It's very important to feel confident and clearly and assertively communicate our needs and concerns. If we seem weak, if we seem tentative or unsure, then we are going to struggle to come to a good agreement. They're going to feel like we're vulnerable and they're going to be more aggressive. That said, if we come out too aggressive, that actually shows people that we're not willing to make a win-win, and that turns people off. They aren't going to want to make a deal with us because they don't want to feel like they're being aggressed either. So we want to use positive language, productive language, and we want to be specific about what we want and explain why what we want is reasonable. By mastering these tactics as entrepreneurs, we can improve our negotiation outcomes. That will lead us to better deals, stronger relationships, and greater business success overall. So the takeaway here is that being an entrepreneur or business owner is not easy. And the fact of the matter is, in terms of being negotiating, we're going to need to be able to do that at some point or another. It's just inevitable. So if we go into every single negotiation prepared and we go in with all of these points thought through, we're going to feel more confident, we're going to project more confidence, and we're going to be much more likely to come out with a win-win that benefits both parties, builds a relationship long-term, and helps ensure our own business success.